Hello, good morning. Welcome to this a session, a virtual session of a discussion we had last week at our compliance conference in Birmingham. It's got an amazing title. It's called "Welcome to the Future: How Transparent Information Benefits Solicitors and Their Clients." And it's really a session where we want mutual engagement around what is happening in the legal services market, how the consumer pull for new information, different information, things at different times, and the relationship between solicitors and clients is changing. We had an excellent session last week. We're going to start today by having a little clip, about 30 minutes of a version of the session that we did in Birmingham. There'll be some questions there that will stimulate other questions today. And any time you can submit questions by clicking on the link at the bottom of your screen. They'll come through to us, and I will be taking on the role that Clive Myrie did last week, and trying to make sure that all of our panel take the questions. I'm delighted that the panel have reconvened. We've got Vicky Hosking, Managing Partner from Smith & Co Solicitors. We've got Salim Arif, who comes from co-founder and chairman of Review Solicitors. And we've got David Abbott, who is representing the Legal Service Board Consumer Panel. We had a really interesting discussion last week. As I say, you're going to see a condensed version of that. And then we're going to have a good session of questions, I hope, today. I'll come back and see you all in 30 minutes or so. We're here, we're online. Any questions you want to start submitting, we'll be seeing. And then there'll be a chance to keep submitting questions as we go live. But thanks for joining us. I hope you find the session interesting, and we look forward to your questions. Here's the film from last week. Thank you.
Welcome to the future. How transparent information benefits solicitors and clients. Now, making sure customers can access helpful information about legal services has been a focus for legal regulators. 5 years ago, the Competition and Markets Authority's review of the sector said the legal market wasn't working well for the public or small businesses. People were struggling to access useful information on things like cost and quality to help them choose the best option. Now, this had the knock-on effect of stifling competition. Well, this year the SRA has been running a pilot to look at the potential for comparison websites, particularly looking at online customer reviews. Let's discuss all this with Salim Arif from Review Solicitors, an online comparison website. It's good to see you. Vicky Hosking, who is a managing partner at Smith & Co, a firm from Ipswich. She had 2 decades of commercial experience before she became a solicitor. Hi there, Vicky. Hello. David Abbott is from the Legal Services Consumer Panel. David has a wealth of experience in independent regulation and the legal sector. Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. And Tracy Vigro, the SRA's Executive Director of Strategy and Innovation. Her team are running the pilot comparison website. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Okie dokie. So I'm going to start with Tracy, I think. The SRA carried out an evaluation of the transparency rules last year. You found that most consumers surveyed were happy with the information they found and thought it was easy or very easy to find a solicitor. So why is the SRA still doing more work on this?
Well, thanks. It's a great opening question, isn't it? So I think the thing we'd say about the transparency evaluation, it's year 1. And as Anna said this morning, we're committed to doing 1 year, 3 year and 5 year evaluations, because often you can have initial benefits that don't then see you through to the end. So I don't think we take anything as a given. I think the other thing I'd say about the research, which of course was independently done for us, it absolutely coincided with lockdown. And so actually I think people's move to look online because they couldn't go in and ask for advice on a high street or whatever probably made the move to looking online very, very quick, much quicker than you would have seen under normal circumstances. That stat people quote about 3 years development in 3 months probably was true. So that's all good. I think where we come from as the regulator and why we're doing the pilots is that we want to build on that, not let it slip back. And actually what you didn't want to do is for the new normal to become the old normal, and actually people creep back into ways where the consumer wasn't at the heart of the process. So I think that's the first thing. It might have been a snapshot. We hope not. And I think if we don't fall back, the messages we had from that research, and of course we'll be soon commissioning year 3 evaluation, was that consumers actually, it was a bit of a demographic issue. Some people only wanted to be able to engage electronically, take services digitally. So actually there was a point where for the profession, this was a really good pilot to do as well, because they were going to learn something about how in fact you grow the market. So actually if the younger demographic who are next going to be buying a flat want to do it all entirely online, you know, where are they on the tech that enables that to happen, and how would they handle the process and in terms of not just price but the quality of that service and the availability and so on. So that's why we did the pilot. We were a bit worried at the beginning because lots of people said that's not how law works, and this isn't a therm of energy, this isn't a kind of hotel room, you can't do those kind of things, you can't do go compare on law, it's not one service and so on. So mindful of that, we started in just a couple of areas of law. We were very pleased we got other regulators to work with us on it, because I think that sort of collaboration is what's going to help us all, the profession, us the regulator, and generally professional services, get into the level of customer service that people expect. I think what we say about quality indicators in law probably applies to medtech and other ways of taking professional services. I don't think it's entirely true. My previous role as a regulator with audit and accounts, and that stuff is the same. You know, does the client, who's often a small business, really understand what they're getting in the kind of quality of audit for the price they're getting, and so on. So, you know, some of these issues translate across professional services. The other thing I'd say about piloting is we really wanted to understand how do we all learn by doing? So rather than us as the regulator coming up with new rules that are very prescriptive but actually stifle the market improving, we read the CMA report back to back several times, because actually what it says is this is an interesting market because it's not actually followed a lot of the principles where everything is a race to the bottom and the cheapest price is the best. On some other research that was done, many consumers on legal services don't take the cheapest option. They actually go for the mid-price. So they actually recognise that it's not just about price, it is about experience and quality and so on. So they were all the reasons why we decided to go further and do the pilot. Let's not take anything as a given. It may have been a bit of a moment in time, and whatever happened for us as a regulator, there were way more lessons to learn, and we wanted to do that across the different regulators, because I think, you know, David will speak for the LSB and the consumer panel, but you can't assume anything. And actually, legal service regulation is not, it's not simple. It's not one sector regulator. There are multiple regulators.
Sure.
So actually, that piloting was a good thing, we thought, for all sorts of reasons about how we work together.
Yeah, I mean, David, Tracy's right, isn't she, about the public's expectations as a result of the pandemic? And one wonders if the SRA and the legal profession is ready to meet the challenge of those changed expectations.
Well, I think there are changed expectations, and I think the reason why we're confident in saying that is that the key tool that the panel has at its disposal is the tracker survey, which I'd commend to everybody if you haven't come across it. It's a really important document for us. And importantly, the latest tracker survey, which is completing 10 years of data, the fieldwork was undertaken in February, March this year. And so I think we've got comparative data looking across, you know, the first 12 months of the pandemic. And so what that tells us is that behaviour's changed. People are more likely to shop around. So we found that 35% of people, as opposed to 27%, were shopping around. And they were saying that different things were becoming more important to them as a result of that. So having an accessible service, an online service, and one where their case was kind of trackable, was becoming important to them. You know, we clearly, there was no other option but to deliver some services online because it was the only game in town, and that's reflected in the outcomes. But I think other interesting data from the survey is that consumers actually recall seeing some of the information that they're being given, having looked at the service online than before when they were given information face to face. It's kind of sticking with them. So information about the qualifications of the people and the experience of the people that will be dealing with their case, and, you know, other elements of information that we, I think, sometimes think is kind of just trotted out as a tick box exercise, but it's actually sticking with people by consuming services in these ways. And So, I mean, there are other examples, but I think the question is, will those trends stick, as has been said already? I think they will stick, but we need to have the research to demonstrate that. We shouldn't make assumptions about anything. We already know that reputation is one of the strongest factors for people in choosing the legal services that they select. And I think people want information they would have got from asking a friend or a family member. They want to be able to access that information publicly through a website or whatever. So I think for us, the important thing is to put information on websites, as obviously many people are compelled to do these days, but to think about the fact that consumers who don't shop around are going to rely on that information on your website even more than they would if they were kind of in that active shopping around process. But I think even more importantly is you need to be in a position to follow up information that's given publicly. And there's other research. There's a company called Glenesk that did some research and published it earlier this year. And that was looking at what happens when people make inquiries of law firms. And actually, many consumers were getting quite a poor service. They were not having their inquiries responded to after they've made them. They were not having their calls returned. They were not having their emails answered. So we think it's as important to follow up the active publication of data by engaging with consumers to help to explain what they've read and to kind of really, truly kind of communicate with them.
Okay. Vicky, I wonder, we've heard a lot about the upsides. It seems to be what the public want to a degree. I wonder what the downsides are, putting out there information and automating, the whole process of dealing with a solicitor to a degree. But also getting out there, company information. Could some of that be sensitive? I mean, is there anything there that could be problematic for a firm in doing this?
I think there are. I see it, just following on for what David is saying is that I see our website as our shop window. And if websites are now going to be our shop windows, then what do we need to have on display in our virtual windows? So the first point I would say when arriving at a website is that contact information is first and foremost, and I'll come back to that. Then after that, it needs to be the scope of services, because of course the consumer coming into the website wants to see if that particular firm does provide that service. And then following on from there, it could be a profile of the particular lawyer or department, something that's personable and professional that starts to connect and engage with the consumer. And then after that, it might be pricing. We hear a lot now about pricing. Pricing, if in itself is there without those other that other information that sits around pricing, then can come across as very flat. Now, following on our website, we have review solicitors, because by being able to connect with a review may reassure and validate that consumer that somebody else, another legal consumer, has had a hopefully positive experience with that lawyer, with the department, with the firm. So that's an independent kind of validation. Now, all of this is building a connection with the legal consumer, and that's what we're having to do. If our doors are closed, if our reception services are not available, then what we're doing is we're beginning the relationship with the consumer. Now then, they may come to price, and if the price is within their expected range and they've been reassured and they feel there's a connection, they then may pick up or make connection through the contact details. And so I believe that every page should have a way to that consumer to connect, because you want to engage there and then. Now, also I feel that we may fear, and I think there's a lot of fear in the legal sector, that the legal consumer is then going to stop that process and then start again on another website. But we all know, if we are shopping for a product or a service, we've only got so much of an appetite to go off and search on the internet. we get a bit weary of internet searching. So if your website has been able to deliver a lot of the information that that consumer is looking for, you're going to actually reduce the risk of that consumer then hopping on to the next website and starting again. So going back to my point, if your shop front is good, then you have every chance of getting that consumer to engage with your firm.
Okay, Salim, though, I wonder, is a consumer ever going to be able to really make the kind of informed choice simply from a website entry? Is it going to boil down to price? In which case, is that the best way to serve the consumer?
No, I mean, I think consumers look for more than just necessarily the cheapest price. I mean, obviously, if prices are displayed and they see nothing else, they will pick the cheapest firm that's out there because they've got nothing else to compare it to. But actually providing the information that consumers want makes a big difference. I mean, it's interesting, the research that we have done. We went through, we launched Review Solicitors back in 2015. So we went through 6 years worth of reviews across all firms. And it was interesting. Most of the complaints that we've been having, about firms are not to do with things like legal advice. It's actually to do with levels of service. In fact, I've got the stats on it. 56% of all the complaints on Review Solicitors are to do with levels of service. 24% are to do with, misinformation about prices. For example, somebody offered a low price and then jacked the price up and it made the client upset. Only 14% of all the complaints that were on there were to do with quality of advice. People don't necessarily know how to judge the advice that they're given. They kind of expect, well, if you're a solicitor, you should know what you're doing. So the advice they kind of take for granted. But it's the service elements which are absolutely crucial.
Okay. Who out there thinks it's a good idea to have a comparison website for legal firms? Hands up. Okay. Right. That is way less than half, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Someone out there who doesn't think it's a good idea, pop your hand up.
Okay.
Right. Sir, right in front of me. Why isn't it a good idea?
Brian Rogers from the Access Group. I've done a lot of work on the comparison sites and I've had a look at a lot of the data that's on there. How can solicitors have confidence that they're being ranked in the right place when there are situations, and this is just one out of numerous that I found, where there was a firm ranked lower than another firm based on more reviews, they had a higher quality mark, they were more highly recommended as a firm, and the clients were happy with the outcome. So why have we got, and as I say, there's lots of firms like this, why have we got people being ranked lower? There's a lot of firms out there that are ranked on a 5-star, so it's going to be difficult enough to distinguish. So people will start going down to these other sort of subsets. But if they're actually misleading people into thinking that a firm is better when in fact they're not, how does that help? So I'm not necessarily against it, but I want you comparison site providers to give everybody the confidence. What mechanisms are you using to assess firms?
Sure. I mean, to answer that particular question, it's not purely just about star rating. It's also about things like the recency of the review. So, for example, if somebody left a review 5 years ago, it doesn't have the same value as a review that was left today because the firm may well have changed in the interim. So, and also it depends on what the search was. So, for example, if it's for a specific area of law, although the firm as a whole may be ranked lower, maybe for that particular area, they're actually ranked higher. So then that would be how we actually, but there are a few other elements which go into that algorithm. But certainly recency of review also has a big impact too.
It's an algorithm.
Yes. So we have an algorithm on our site.
It's a machine that does it.
But it would certainly help if there was more transparency.
Yeah, I mean,
about transparency here.
Sure. I mean, just to, yeah, I mean, just.
Okay. You can just respond to our gentleman with that point, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, on our site, we provide a lot of data. There's a lot of information, not only about the firm as a whole, but by department, by area of law. and also even by individual solicitors. So we're encouraging law firms to actually have each of their individual solicitors profiled, having their profile on the page, and bring all their reviews together from a multitude of different sources. So for example, we enable law firms to bring any Google reviews, any Facebook reviews, bring all their feedback together in one place. And it just gives the potential client a bit more information to know that, how do I choose between 12,000 law firms? It's really hard to tell firms apart. Lots of law firms have the same wording even on their own website, saying that they're modern with traditional values. How do you tell firms apart? What we've tried to do is to give people as much information as we possibly can to make a more informed choice.
You can rig a review though, can't you?
No,
That's what they do on Amazon.
We have a number of methods to make sure that doesn't happen. So for example,
Amazon say that too, man.
we check IP addresses, and in fact, we have found some firms that have tried to manipulate.
If you want, oh really?
We've attempted to manipulate by putting large numbers of positive reviews about themselves, where that has been.
You just can't trust a lawyer, can you?
There's certainly one element, and what we've done. For example, Vicky will know this from Smith & Co. We've integrated with virtually every major case management firm, so a firm can actually have their reviews being collected at the end of each individual matter. Okay. That's how we know that these are genuine clients, and any reviews that come through a case management integration, they just have much more value because we know it's a genuine client. It isn't just somebody, bad-mouthing a competitor or writing reviews about themselves.
Okay, it's a lady here.
It's following on from that similar question that I had, but one firm asked me about, they were concerned about that exactly point, that there was limited data, and comparing themselves with another law firm, their suspicion was it on alphabetical order if there's no data in there? And that was a real concern from a firm that I spoke to. Really? Is there any reassurance on that it's not on, going back to the yellow pages, if you're in AAA taxis, you're going to get called first?
Obviously, the way that it works in terms of our rankings is firms that actually have reviews will obviously appear above any firms that don't have any reviews, because at least we have some information about that. In terms of the rankings for those firms without, that have reviews, it has nothing to do with alphabetical, because we actually have real data to go at. It is true that we obviously want to encourage more firms to be collecting the reviews with us, and at the moment, if we have no information, they just appear at the bottom of the list, and that's probably true. It's not always, actually, because if we have certain data sets in order to go at, then it is we don't rank them in that way. But I do take your point. It is something that we are looking at, actually, about how do we rank firms where we have no data for that to be able to compare them, and that's something that we'll take on board.
Okay, so Zed and Zephaniah, lawyers at should watch out. They're screwed potentially. All right, okay, gentleman over here. Question here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent Honorable from OVO Solicitors Principal. Now, I am against comparison website for solicitors, because there's already Google comparison sites, which is an independent one, as opposed to the comparison sites for solicitors. But also, there isn't any criteria for rating as regards to solicitors. For example, myself, on 2 or 3 occasions, some clients have phoned simply to ask, do you do wills? And if I say, oh, sorry, I don't offer that, down, they'll go out and say, oh, he's rude, he didn't put the phone down. So what sort of rating is that? Is he rating my ability to provide legal services, or my telephone manners, or what? I really don't know what that is. But also, there is an important way to deal with this issue of comparison. I think the SRA says, welcome to the future, how transparent information benefits solicitors and their clients, but also how it can benefit the SRA themselves. Because the 2 speakers on the table have mentioned how clients value experience and longevity as very crucial. Why is it that the SRA could not, within that symbol they place on website, put the age of a firm on it, so that any client who is going to your website will know how old the business has been there? I think that should be the starting point. The website, the logo, SRA logo.
All right. Okay.
Just put inside it the age of the firm.
Tracy.
Sorry.
Yeah, so you mean on the digital logo, it doesn't just say register with the SRA, it says from 19 whatever.
Establish this or that. That's very important. What it does, it helps the SRA as a regulatory body, because the new firms will be aware that they will not get that sign of 3 or 4 if they don't handle themselves very well. So they see that as a stimulus to move forward, and it becomes easier for the SRA to actually regulate.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. True. Can you just respond to that?
It's interesting. So in the quality indicator pilots, this is exactly the reason why we're doing it as a pilot activity, because we really want to understand what kind of additional information. Some of the rules of engagement that we've got for the pilot pick up on some of these points about what is actually going to avoid it being a kind of lottery at the end if there's less data, what's significant enough data to make it really comparable, which is I think a point that a lot of people have touched on. How can you trust that data? So I will take that one forward about what data we hold on firms, whether or not we put it in the public domain more actively, and does that enable everybody then to tell a slightly better story about a firm's standing, how long the individual person who's going to be dealing with this particular issue has been at the firm, all that kind of stuff. What you're saying is track record counts slightly more. So I'll take that on board. It's not something we've looked at in the pilot, but I take your point about you often see it above shops, don't you, since whenever. And we hold that information, but we obviously don't put it in the public domain.
Just to answer your previous point, the issue about Google reviews, there is a particular problem with Google reviews, which is in order to get a Google review, your client needs to have a Gmail or Google Mail account. If they don't have a Gmail or Google Mail account, they cannot leave a review, and not many people bother setting one up specifically in order to write a review. But also there's one other big issue, which is if somebody writes a false review of you, like you talked about that person who just, they've put the phone down and they're upset that you don't do wills and probate work, they're not a real client and they shouldn't really be able to leave that review. But if you try and get that review removed from Google, it is near impossible. It will either take you many months to do so, or in most cases, you will never be able to get rid of it. With us, whether you're a free member or a premium member, if somebody leaves a false review, you can actually just, if you've registered and taken control of your page, you can actually have it taken down within 5 minutes. It's you can have it suspended straight away. We go back to the person who wrote the review and ask them to prove to us that they were a client of yours. If they can't, which in this instance they wouldn't be able to do, the review is removed permanently. You just have much more control as a result.
We had that experience. Somebody did leave a Google review for one of our very hard-working fee earners, and he was devastated by it, and also it impacted on his morale. Amongst the team, he was embarrassed, and they weren't a client of the firm, and that wasn't ideal. What we now do is, we are signed up with Review Solicitors, that if someone is having an initial appointment, we actually we attach the link to their page on Review Solicitors, so they can see what some of their other clients have experienced with the person that's going to take on their case going forward. They can hear the experiences. He gave really sensible advice. He held my hand throughout. Now that's a really positive way to use reviews at the outset of the matter as well.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a question from this lady here. Thank you.
I remember a few years ago.
Sorry, what's your name?
Oh, sorry,
where are you from?
Kate Burton from a small firm, South Leicestershire. I remember a few years ago we had a thing called Solicitors from Hell. That was a website that caused so much heartache for a lot of solicitors. Joking aside, they had injunctions, they had all sorts of claims against them to try and move it. I remember one firm, one particular person was targeted because they were an unhappy client. My concern is, and I hear what you're saying about the level of service, my experience during the pandemic is that clients' expectations has become far higher. They've lost boundaries, they've lost when they should send, but they send you an email and they expect a response within 2 hours, and if they don't, they'll be on the review telling you all about it, how they haven't, the service is appalling. That's one of my major concerns. We've been through it. We're having a lot of, everything I buy now, I must review. I'm getting bored of it. And I'm just wondering if there isn't some, I just want to go down that road again. I think we all do a good job. Most of my clients come from recommendations. I don't do any advertising whatsoever, and we're doing fine. Is there a need?
Yeah, David, your analysis is that there is a need.
Yes, I mean, I take your point entirely, but going back to our research, we're finding that different cohorts of people behave in different ways, and so there's an indication that younger people do want to shop around more than maybe older groups. And so I understand what you're saying about your particular firm, but there'll come a time by which the general expectation of clients will be that there's more information and the ability to proactively compare different law firms. So I think that it's dangerous maybe to kind of overly kind of cruise maybe and be satisfied with the way that your business is performing, and maybe you'll be fortunate and that's fine, and but there'll be plenty of people who don't get to know your reputation because they don't happen to know the right person in their town to ask to recommend you. And so this is another channel of getting recommendations almost. It's another way of giving reassurance to people, and I think in time that there'll just be that general expectation in the future.
I just think it's hard to say one size fits all. That's all. I just don't.
Yeah, I mean,
because we're a people profession, not selling goods, not selling like this is what we are. One size doesn't fit all.
Well, I think that's about the quality of the information you're giving, and it's not about just kind of slapping on basic information about the way that costs are calculated. It's more nuanced than that, and it's also about understanding the different kinds of people that might potentially want to do business with you. So we're finding the behaviour of different groups of people vary. So in some areas of the law, people from ethnic minorities have different shopping around habits. They're more likely or less likely in some legal areas to shop around. And so you also need to be kind of aware of that and to make sure you're not closing off groups of people who can actually benefit from your quality service.
With my managing partner of a small firm hat on, I would also say it has been a very busy time. And I think that it's almost counterintuitive that we're saying, make yourself more available to your consumers when we can barely keep up with the work that we've got coming in at the moment. So I think that's real. That's what we're living at the moment. And I think also there can be an underconfidence in that we're meant to be marketeers, brand ambassadors. We're meant to know about digital marketing. I feel underconfident, looking for a marketing agency that can help. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for. I don't know how to compare digital marketeers. And also I think there is a fear as well that we may get it wrong. So maybe, I think the slide earlier is let's be an ostrich and put our head in the sand because we're fearful of getting it wrong, doing it badly, making a bad job of it and making things worse. So I think these are all very real factors. We're having to wear lots of different hats. Essentially we're lawyers, a lot of us are lawyers as well as having to do lots of other jobs. And I think it's quite tough to navigate all of these different demands that we're now expected to do.
Hope you all enjoyed that clip and it stimulated some questions. We've had quite a lot of questions already appear in the chat, and I'm going to kick off by taking some of those. But just a reminder, you can keep submitting questions. We've got 30 minutes now. We're going to be hearing from the panel. I'm, as I say, going to assume the Clive Myrie role here and be asking the questions. But obviously anything that's got an SRA element to it, I'm very happy to add my thoughts too. Number of you have submitted questions anonymously, so I'm just going to ask them in general. But a few people have mentioned their names, and I'll name check ones accordingly. If we don't get to your question, I'm really sorry. We've got quite a lot and we've only got 30 minutes. But anybody who wants to follow up with us can come through to the SRA either through our ethics helpline or directly to the policy and strategy teams. So don't worry if we don't get around to it today. But I'm delighted to say we had an excellent first question, and I think I'm going to come first of all just in general through the panel. I'm going to start with you, David, and then maybe Salim and Vicky. This is one which is at the core of it. It's what transparency is just all about lowest price. It's not about service. It's not actually helping the consumer in any way. And somebody is saying it's all very well them having to quote their fees and transparency on cost as the SRA demands. But what about when clients really do just take way more work? And so actually it's not fair assessment of this quality of the service and so on. How do we deal with that transparency and price and add in other things, other issues that are important to the consumer? How is it not a race to the bottom, I guess is what they're saying. David, what do you think on that one from the consumer panel perspective?
Well, I think it's really important to say from our point of view, it's definitely not a race to the bottom. It's in nobody's interests not to have a thriving legal sector. The panel's already concerned about advice deserts, so we want a thriving legal sector. And so for us, the key issue is not about price, but it's about value for money. So that is where the interplay between cost and quality. And so that's kind of our key argument about transparency, really. What you are putting into the public domain is information about both sides of that equation, cost and quality. And that is the thing that helps the client make the best possible choice. I can see at the point about, I think in what you were saying, Tracy, in the question, there's some questions about kind of differential pricing, about the level of work that different clients kind of cause. And I understand that point, and I think it's quite reasonable for the cost to the client to be based on the amount of work that's undertaken. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The only perhaps note of caution I'd sound about that particular idea is that there's a possibility it might lead to perhaps inadvertent discrimination about different kinds of client groups. So I think you'd need to monitor how you are adopting that kind of differential pricing approach. And that's only one kind of niche example of, I think, what we're talking about. But the broad point is the panel is concerned about quality and cost, and it's about value for money to the consumer that's important.
Thank you, David. I think that value for money point is where we as a regulator would come into. We wouldn't want our price rules to inadvertently make something look like a simpler choice than it is. It's a number of points. Celine, what do you think about that from a sort of review site perspective? What are you looking at? Is it just price?
No, most definitely not. We feel that if people only have price information, but they don't have any information about quality, you're right, it will lead to just a race to the bottom. And that's what I think everyone in the legal market wants to avoid. And actually, it's borne out by the evidence that we have on our site that actually most of the issues and complaints that people have are not to do with price, they're to do with service. There's a significant proportion of the market that wants to know, where are they going to be looked after properly? It's not just about picking the cheapest firm in the particular town or city. That may well not be the right choice for them. And if you mandate law firms to provide price information, it is really, really important that they're also able to display something around how good they actually are in terms of their quality.
Yeah, I think that's true, actually, and probing further. Vicky, I'm going to come to you and your experience of how you and your firm have dealt with this point.
So we follow the mantra that consumers of legal services follow the way they buy many other goods or services, in that it is service first, then delivery or time, and then finally price. So if you imagine a potential client coming to the firm and making the initial inquiry, they want to first of all, they need to know, do you offer that service? And if you do, they want some reassurance that the person assigned to their case, the fee earner, there is a fit, and that they have the experience they're looking for. They want to feel that they can form a good relationship. And then also they want to know about price. And if all of those elements are present, you then can form a trusting relationship, which also is then, if you're going to put your prices on your website, that they need to reflect then what comes through in the information as well. So all of that is about forming a good, positive, trusting relationship with the potential client that's then going to go on and be a long, enduring relationship, because in the legal sector, we do tend to benefit from long-standing relationships with clients. So getting it right at the outset, being transparent with pricing and servicing, I think sets that relationship up for the long term.
That's really helpful to hear all your views, because I think that's what has really been so important in the legal sector, hasn't it? That element of trust, clients really understanding that there's a special relationship. Is there something about Salim, review sites, and it somehow might be a detriment to smaller practitioners who just can't ever appear as high in the rankings? I mean, how does it operate? How are the review sites looking at things like size of firm as well?
Yeah, this is quite often a misconception I hear that only large firms that get large numbers of reviews will appear at the top of our rankings. Actually, the way that we do our rankings is done very, very differently. It's based on a number of other factors, including recency of review, as well as the star ratings and quality of the feedback that's been given. I mean, I was talking to one of my colleagues this morning. For example, if you typed in, employment solicitors Oxford, in our rankings, it's actually a sole practitioner in Oxford that is at the top of that ranking, way ahead of the likes of a number of very large top 100 firms that collect reviews with us. They provide an outstanding service and they collect reviews regularly. So they appear really highly in our rankings.
So that's one misconception. We've also got a question, with slightly relevant question, also about misconception. So Johanna has said it's just not fair, the whole principle of review sites, because people are essentially paying for a listing, and the more you pay, the higher you are in the listing. Is this true? And she talks about it should be much more transparent. Maybe reviews should be listed in alphabetical order. How do you deal with some of these? How are the different review sites? Do you all operate the same? What's the kind of principles you adhere to?
Yeah, I think different review sites may operate differently. I know how we operate, and it most definitely is not based on whether somebody is a premium paying client of ours or not. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned at the event in Birmingham last week was that if somebody types in solicitors in London, where we finished top on Google, the top ranked firm on there is actually a non-premium client of ours. They're not paying, but they collect reviews regularly. They have outstanding reviews. So therefore, it's reflected by them being at the very top of that ranking at the moment. There is actually very little correlation between whether a firm is paying and having top rank. I mean, the only thing is, if a firm is paying, typically they are more incentivized, they're focused, they want to get more reviews in, they're actually actively asking their client base to leave feedback. So, that's where it comes from. But a firm doesn't have to be paying us in order to be appearing at the top of our rankings.
So that's very interesting. So Vicky, I'm going to come to you and then you, David, just to sort of say, so do you think that's coming across to consumers, that actually their view matters, and actually they're helping other consumers by sharing their perspective and so on? Or are consumers reluctant to give reviews?
So one of the things that we implemented with review solicitors is that at the early stage of an inquiry, that we will send a link to that particular fee earner to the potential new client. Now, and I think that has that's beneficial in many ways. It's reassuring for the consumer, but also it is showing the client the advantages of leaving a review. So when we get to the end of that retainer and we ask them again to leave a review, because they've engaged with it at the outset, they may be more inclined to use it again and leave a review. Because from a small firm basis, it is a constant investment in the review process. But I think it then becomes a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, because you then start seeing the benefit of collecting reviews, making sure those reviews don't get stale. Because as Salim is saying, if for a firm that becomes complacent and stops gathering them, it also really helps with your complaint management process, because you don't want clients to be unhappy and disgruntled and leaving bad reviews. So it really makes you tune in to making sure clients are having a positive experience. But most of all, it's that the fee earner, is taking responsibility for the management of that retainer themselves, because if they're liking how a good review feels, and from a personal point of view, it does give you a boost and a buzz if you get a good review. It then means that process then becomes a sort of embedded into the firm's culture. So I think there are so many advantages to reviews.
That's very interesting. So this point about individual fee earners as well, and actually it's rather good from, I imagine, a professional pride point of view. If someone is consistently the fee earner at the firm who is getting the most outstanding reviews, that's rather motivating, isn't it? And certainly helps this idea that it's not just a bland advice. It actually is tailored exactly to the client. David, I'm going to ask, because obviously the consumer panel does a sort of consumer tracker. What's your perception of how consumers are embracing review sites and using it as a tool?
I think what we can say is the tracker survey that we've been running now for 10 years has now got enough data behind it to demonstrate some trends. What we can definitely say is the proportion of consumers who shop around for legal services has increased over those 10 years. And what we can also say is, particularly since the start of the COVID pandemic, that offering an online service has increased importance for consumers. And I think that trend information, I think, as we've already heard from Vicky, is kind of only going one way, really. And I think what goes along with greater shopping around and greater use of online services is the expectation that you'll give feedback, because that's just the natural way of doing business these days for all kinds of services. So I think we'll definitely see a rise in people's willingness to give feedback, because they can see that they're contributing to creating this kind of store of information about legal services.
Yeah, thank you, David. I've got another question that's been submitted, which again is relevant. It's taking it to another level about, yes, it's good marketing, but what about people who have a very, very slick shop front and have chosen their reviews selectively? I'm guessing just the good ones, but actually they aren't very good lawyers. I'm going to come to everyone in turn on this. I'm going to start with you, Salim. But from an SRA point of view, as the regulator, I think I probably ought to say here that, of course, anybody who is not doing their job, we as a regulator would be alive to that. Complaints and things are investigated. If we saw any suggestion that there was anything where people were giving misleading information, that would be something that we would look at anyway, or anyone pretending they had qualifications that they don't have or anything like that. So none of the normal regulatory oversight is not applicable. You know, it's all still there. We're not giving the review sites our job. Any regulatory detriment is dealt with by us in the normal way. So just to reassure people on that. But Salim, what do you think about that one? It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all very slick, but nobody's holding to them account on whether it's true.
The way that we operate is that we encourage firms to integrate with their case management system, review solicitors. So, you know, we already have integrations with 90% of suppliers, and it just means that when a matter is closed, an automated email goes out to the client asking them for their feedback. And we don't want firms just saying, well, I want to choose these particular clients, but not these other ones. You know, we are quite wary of that. We're quite careful. We do keep a close eye to ensure that there isn't any kind of manipulation taking place on the platform. You know, if we have spotted anything like that, you know, we'll come down hard on it. But yeah, it is incredibly important to us that firms are actually being truthful and not misleading. But also, even in the reviews themselves, if somebody's actually providing bad advice, it will come out in the wash. People will end up writing about it, saying, well, you know, they may have been quite slick, but, you know, the actual quality of advice or, you know, the outcome wasn't what I expected. In fact, I think that's one of the charts that we have on each page for each firm is, you know, was I satisfied with the outcome? They would have a very low score on that if actually the quality of the advice is bad.
It's interesting. We've had another question submitted immediately from Clive, who says he's not Clive Myrie, so that's useful to know he's not stalking us. And it's very much about this, though, that, you know, is the very concept of paying for these review comparison sites just not in keeping with the spirit of them being fair and open and so on? How can they be policed if someone's paying for it? Can it really be left to the market? And all I'd say on that as the regulator, Clive, is that we're going with the grain of the CMA report that was published at the end of 2020. And they actually do think there's a lot of benefit from the market. And they have looked at other regulated sectors where review sites are way more embedded. I think in Ofcom about what people are paying for mobile phone services and things like that, and in other aspects of life. So I think it's a good question. And I'm going to come to you, David, and then Vicky, to just go a little bit further what Salim said. Can it ever be left to the market, this kind of reviewing and this data? And actually, can it ever really be trusted?
Speaking for myself, I think that there is certainly a danger of having a kind of a slick operation that looks good and maybe even provides good customer service in terms of answering the telephone quickly, but actually, it's a poor legal service. That is definitely a danger. And a kind of one of the themes that I return to is it's about having good quality information, and something the consumer panel is working on is to try to encourage a wide basket of indicators to be developed about what quality looks like. Now, at the moment, there are some indicators. So you could imagine you might use complaints data, you might use ombudsman findings, review sites, success rates. There are a number of things. Now, the consumer panel, we're not lawyers. We don't pretend to have all the answers. And so we're encouraging the sector and professionals themselves to identify what they think are good quality indicators. You all know what each other, how each of the services are perceived. You kind of know who else in your town is a good firm of lawyers. How do you know that? We need to understand that, and we need to kind of capture that information and also get consumer perspective. So for us, it's not only about reviews, it's about the whole range, having a basket of indicators that helps people to understand the actual quality of the legal service as opposed to just the kind of the consumer service that people are getting.
That's a really good point. And Vicky, coming to you, I guess that also leads into what you were saying. It's a showcase for you, isn't it? So actually, on anything, you wouldn't want to say anything you couldn't substantiate. That wouldn't be good for your firm in the long run.
Well, I think, no, that wouldn't be. But I think whoever asked this question, actually, it's a brilliant question, because we have to remind ourselves that this is a compliance conference. And I would say there's some argument to say that your compliance officers should be actually sitting alongside your marketing people, because I run a small firm. We're about a team of about 16. I have to wear lots of different hats. So I will turn up to the marketing meetings, also being the complaints officer and the transparency and making sure our prices and our badge is on our website. Now, it doesn't make any sense, does it, if I am dealing with complaints and getting feedback from clients in terms of complaints, but then having information on the website about, how brilliant we are and how wonderful we are and these are our prices. If there isn't joined up thinking, then actually that's the first area to address. And so I think my practical suggestion to people is actually have a think about doing, getting people to work together, because there is a sharing of information that ultimately will benefit the consumers.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Again, just adding the SRA perspective, I think that's why we're piloting our current quality indicator work. We want to do this in a way that's going to be helpful for smaller and larger law firms. Someone's asked a question here about how do you know, is it ethical to direct consumers to leave a review? How much guidance should you give a client about the kind of review they might choose to place on a review site? Has anybody got any thoughts on that? What's almost writing it for them and what's encouraging them to leave a response? How do you moderate that, Salim?
The way that we do this is that we
just make it really slick and simple for somebody to be able to leave a review, through the sort of case management integrations, or we provide a link that the firm that can be sent out to the client on completion of a matter. It just makes it really easy for somebody to actually fill out the review form. We don't give a huge amount of guidance about what is written on there. We have a title section, a content section, and then various adjectives which the author can actually choose to describe their experience. And I think that's really useful for the law firm to know that if somebody's written a positive review, they'll know why somebody liked the service. If somebody has written a less than positive review, it has different adjectives, and the firm will therefore know, okay, these are the areas that we need to improve on as a firm to provide a better service. I think the reviews lead to improved services over time, because firms get better because they want to get more, better reviews and better feedback across all of their individual fee earners.
Thanks for that, Salim. I think that's good advice, and that's a part of the service. You can make it joined up, as Vicky was saying. We've literally got sort of 5 minutes left, but there's several more questions. One, I just wanted very quick responses from everybody, starting with you, Vicky. Is this true that review sites are also good for commercial clients who may have gone through a very fixed procurement process? Is there still relevant information? Is it still useful?
Yes, I mean, we're a smaller firm, so to be honest, we don't tend to deal with larger scales. But going back to the mantra, it's still service, delivery, price. Whatever business sector, whatever size, those are still important principles that people choose to buy.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah. David, any thoughts on that? I mean, small businesses are an important part of the legal services board. They struggle also to access professional legal advice when they need it. So it's relevant too, isn't it?
I think it is relevant. I completely agree with what Vicky's just said. I mean, I don't have experience of procurement in the legal sector, but I know that I've done it in other contexts, and I know very often that transparency and that side of things is actually part of the procurement process. They want to know what the firm's transparency approach to transparency is. So I think there's always benefits from transparency.
Yeah. I've got a couple that are very relevant to you, Salim, and actually are questions that follow up on what we've said already. And it's about, well, people admire the idea of review websites. How do clients really understand what the service has been? Are they the best able to judge whether the legal advice was correct and so on? So I think this takes us back to this whole point that it's not just on one thing, it's a number of measures. And if it mattered to the customer, then it matters. But initial responses on that, anything more you want to add? And the whole point about context and advice, is that really done justice on review websites?
Yeah, I mean, people take the legal advice that's been given pretty much for granted that, this person is a solicitor, they should know what they're doing. However, what's borne out is that most of the sort of complaints that we get are to do with service, not to do with advice. We have a statistic that 56% of all the complaints we have are to do with service levels, and 24% are to do with price. It's only, I think, 14% which is to do with the quality of work that's actually been done. So most people, they aren't maybe able to necessarily judge how good or bad the actual advice was, but it's how they felt about how the law firm treated them, how the lawyer treated them.
That's brilliant, Sleep. Look, we could go on all day because there are way more questions. I just want to reiterate, it's been fantastic having the panel regroup. We've got literally the last minute, and I just wanted to give a few housekeeping. Anybody who wants to give feedback, there's a link that you can click on. Please do. Please let us have any further questions. We at the SRA are certainly going to be publishing the results of our quality indicator pilots. We really want to keep continued engagement on this. We don't think it's a simple question. For all the reasons today, today, prompted by all of your questions. There are all sorts of aspects to this. It's not comparing a unit of energy or a hotel room. It's way more meaningful to the customer than that. But it doesn't mean to say we can't help boost consumers' knowledge and make life better for all of us, because the more there aren't misconceptions or misunderstandings, the better the service should be, and the better for the profession if more people start to take legal services. So that's our aspiration in all of this work. Genuine thank you to David, to Salim, and to Vicky, because you've not only done it once, you've done it twice, and it's really, really good of you to spend the time. I hope that the people tuning in today will keep letting us have further questions and continue the engagement with us, the regulator, but with others. And anything is a good question, and we've had a lot of them today, and I'm only sorry we didn't get around to answering a few more, but please do keep in touch, and thank you very much.